The National Desk, America's News, now.
Help build an army, a state, but we could not forge a nation.
Matter mishandled. 2 top military leaders testify on the withdrawal from Afghanistan. Plus,
the path forward is uncertain.
Holding steady, the Fed will not lower interest rates just yet. What's got regulators pumping the brakes? And later, 70 million records allegedly posted for sale on the dark web. The cell phone carrier the hacker says they came from. From the nation's capital, this is the National Desk, America's News Now. Thanks for being here with us. I'm Dee Dee Gatton, and on this Weekend Edition, we take a look at the big headlines of the week, and we look ahead at what to expect, starting with the 4 big stories we've been following this week. New construction surge, the housing market change that could help you snag a new home. Plus, TikTok on the chopping block, new updates on Congress's effort to ban the Chinese-owned app. And later, defining famine in Gaza, the struggle to deliver aid to the enclave as fighting between Hamas and Israel continues. But first, sanctuary cities changing strategies, the shift in policies designed to deal with the migrant crisis. There appears to be a realignment in some parts of this country. Despite calls to continue with humanitarian sanctuary policies, some leaders, even in deep blue cities and states, are changing course, as Christine Frizzell reports.
Cities with long histories of welcoming migrants reversing course, facing new realities stemming from the sheer number and the increasing cost.
And people have a right to be angry over what has happened with the migrants and asylum seeker crisis and how it has impacted on the quality of life.
New York significantly scaling back its right to shelter law. Denver also closing several migrant shelters, with Chicago dialing back its policies as well.
Under the Massachusetts Constitution,
the governor of Massachusetts now in the crosshairs of criticism for her response after a Haitian migrant in her state was charged with raping a 15-year-old.
We have security and systems in place. We have vetting in place. It is unfortunate that from time to time things will happen. And as I say, anywhere, not just in shelter, but anywhere.
Many Haitian migrants already in Mexico, with concerns there may also be an influx making their way to Florida in a matter of days, with this plan just announced.
We do have our transport program also that's going to be operational. So Haitians land in the Florida Keys, their next stop very well may be Martha's Vineyard.
In Pennsylvania, Lancaster County officials just overturned a city law and designated itself a non-sanctuary county.
This massive inflow of people into our country will take resources, will bankrupt our hospital systems.
Their new ordinance requires local law enforcement to comply with ICE detention orders, which migrant advocates warn could dissuade them from reporting crimes.
All people, regardless of immigration status, deserve to be treated with dignity and respect, to feel safe and secure.
Democratic leaders in all of these places are putting the blame largely on Republicans in Congress, as well as former President Trump, for killing a bipartisan deal in the Senate that would have alleviated many of their issues. I'm Christine Frizzell for the National Desk.
New details. The body of missing college student Riley Strain was found in a river in Nashville Friday morning. Police said they discovered the 22-year-old's body 8 miles east of downtown and that there were no signs of foul play. Strain was last seen on March 8th after disappearing during a fraternity trip to Nashville. On Capitol Hill, the 2 men in charge of the U.S. military during the 2021 withdrawal of Afghanistan say the matter was mishandled. Retired Generals Mark Milley and Kenneth McKenzie appeared in front of the House Foreign Affairs Committee this week. Milley said the military advised the Biden administration to get U.S. embassy personnel out of Kabul while U.S. forces were leaving.
On 14 August, the non-combatant evacuation operation decision was made by the Department of State, and the U.S. military alerted, marshaled, mobilized, and rapidly deployed faster than any military in the world could ever do. It is my assessment that that decision came too late.
The Abbey Gate bombing, which killed 13 U.S. service members and many Afghan civilians, happened during the last and chaotic days of the withdrawal process. Milley also said the U.S. failed its mission to train Afghan security troops, a failure that stemmed from decisions made as far back as the early 2000s. The United Nations warns famine is imminent in northern Gaza. The UN and the Famine Review Committee define famine as an area where at least 20% of households face an extreme lack of food, at least 30% of children suffer from acute malnutrition, and 2 people out of every 10,000 are starving to death each day. The UN's World Food Program says virtually everyone in Gaza is struggling to get enough food. About 300,000 of the 2.3 million population is experiencing the highest level of catastrophic hunger in the northern part of the enclave. UN officials accuse Israel of using starvation as a weapon of war.
Because this famine is not a natural disaster. It's not a flood, it's not a earthquake. Is entirely man-made.
It could happen as soon as this month in northern Gaza, and by July in central and southern areas. Israel argues it places no limits on the entry of aid. If you are in the market for a new home, snagging one might become a bit easier. New home construction surged last month following months of high demand and low inventory. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, the pace of new housing starts was up nearly 11% in February. Builders are pushing forward with new construction because they believe the demand for new homes will stay strong. A record-breaking week on Wall Street, the Dow, S&P, and NASDAQ all closing at all-time highs after remarks from Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell about the fight against inflation. The Fed just voted to hold interest rates steady, painful for anybody planning to take out a loan, but maintain a relatively optimistic outlook. National correspondent Atra El-Nashar reports from Washington.
The head of the Federal Reserve says interest rates likely won't get any higher than they are right now, but central bankers aren't ready to lower them just yet.
If we ease too much or too soon, we could see inflation come back. And if we ease too late, we could do unnecessary harm to employment.
The good news, the Fed still expects 3 quarter-point rate cuts by the end of the year. Inflation has dropped considerably since its peak in summer of 2022. The job market is also strong, with the longest streak of unemployment below 4% since the 1960s. So with the economy looking this good on paper, why do polls and surveys show Americans don't feel good? A group at Harvard, which includes former Treasury Secretary Larry Summers, may have figured it out. The cost of borrowing money, that's not reflected in how inflation is measured.
Not only did prices rise, but after that, interest rates rose so much, and that's something that has really been weighing on their finances.
It's why they say when interest rates fall, sentiment could rise significantly. Fortunately for retailers, sour sentiment hasn't dealt any major blows to consumer spending. The National Retail Federation is out with its new forecast for the year, showing sales growth losing a bit of steam, but still rising between 2.5% and 3.5%. That's compared to last year's 3.6%. Consumers have proven resilient, helping the economy defy expectations of a recession last year. The question is, how long and how strong can that last? Some experts will turn to the job market for answers.
I believe we will be slower, perhaps about 100,000 jobs less than we had last year. I think it continues to support consumers' attitudes, their behaviors, and I think their spending.
Experts say the pieces are in place for Americans to start feeling better by the end of the year. But as the Fed acknowledges, nothing is certain. In Washington, I'm Atra El-Nashar reporting.
Developing now, nearly 78,000 public sector workers are getting their student loans tossed out. The White House says it's forgiving a total of $5.8 billion of debt under the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. It cancels student debt for teachers, social workers, certain nurses and doctors, and government lawyers if they make 10 years of monthly payments. Emails to those borrowers will be sent next week. A massive database of alleged AT&T records is available on the dark web for just a couple of bucks, according to cybernews.com. That includes more than 70 million names, addresses, and social security numbers. While the records seem accurate, AT&T says there is no indication its system was compromised and that the data didn't come from them. The seller claims that the information was obtained by a hack in 2021. Friday, Princess Catherine of Wales revealed that she has been diagnosed with cancer. Princess Kate said she is in the early stages of treatment and is undergoing preventative chemotherapy. This all comes after the princess underwent surgery in January for what doctors believed was a non-cancerous abdominal condition. Further testing after the operation revealed the presence of an unspecified form of cancer. A new proposal targeting popular snacks like Cheetos and Takis is making its way through California's state legislature. I'm with Courtney from the Fact Check team. Courtney, break this down for us. What's in this bill?
Sure, Dee Dee. So I read through the text, and the bill would ban California public schools from offering, selling, or otherwise providing any food products that contain 7 artificial dyes. You'll see the list of them there on your screens, and you may have heard of them from popular products like Doritos, Fruit Loops, Sour Patch Kids, and many other kid-focused snacks. And supporters of the bill point to a possible link between artificial dyes and behavioral issues in kids.
And as we look back, didn't California pass a similar bill a few months ago?
Yeah, in fact, California was actually the first state to ban the manufacture, sale, or distribution of foods that contain these 4 potentially harmful chemicals, with a goal of not necessarily banning foods, but encouraging companies to switch to safer ingredients. The bill won't go into effect until 2027, though, to give brands plenty of time to make those adjustments.
Widely popular products. Courtney, thank you. And Courtney will be back with us in just a bit to tell us more about these ingredients and the risks associated with them. New details. Online sales went live this week for the first ever over-the-counter birth control pill. O-pill will also be carried at drugstores across the country once the shipments arrived. The progestin-only drug was approved last year by the FDA for use without a prescription. A 1-month supply is expected to cost around $20. Up next, a dangerous Colombian fugitive captured within U.S. borders. An expert weighs in on the time and resources it took to make the arrest. Plus, women in the workforce frustrated by fewer raises and promotions. We're breaking down the data and advice on how to close the gap. One of the world's most wanted fugitives and reportedly one of the top leaders of a Colombian criminal gang was captured near San Antonio, Texas, after a sweeping investigation that involved multiple law enforcement agencies. 29-year-old Aderbis Pirela was on Interpol's top 10 most wanted, tied to at least 4 murders, drug trafficking, and extortion, with warrants out of Colombia. Joining Jan Jeffcoat to discuss is former acting head of Customs and Border Protection, Mark Morgan.
Agents reportedly went to an address in Denver, I was reading, where they said this guy had listed his address before surveilling him in Texas and then arresting him last week while he was just walking down the street in New Braunfels, Texas. The fact, though, Mark, that he was allowed in this country where authorities say he was operating his drug trafficking operation is outrageous. What did you make of this?
It is outrageous, Jan, and this goes to the heart of one of the many issues you and I talked about multiple times, and that's about vetting. The reality is every time Secretary Mayorkas or anybody from this administration tells the American people that we properly vet everyone before we release them is just a lie. They're provided with a false sense of security that doesn't exist. The reality is there's many countries that illegal aliens are coming to our country from that we have zero diplomatic relationships with, and we're getting nothing with respect to their criminal history. There are other countries that, although we do have relationships with, their databases and ability to provide us with detailed information is just archaic. It's not there. In addition to that, the Border Patrol's mission is fundamentally changed from a law enforcement national security mission to one of a processing enterprise. The reality is every single day, this administration is releasing people that we know nothing about, and we know it before we're releasing them. In the past 36 months, ICE has arrested almost 200,000 criminal illegal aliens in the United States. This is happening every single day because this administration reenacted and reinstituted catch and release.
And this is one of the many examples officials in Texas say is the reason they need Senate Bill 4, which simply would make illegal immigration a state crime. That way, this guy would not be able to fight extradition or the many other ways he can use the current American system, despite the fact that he's not in this country legally. How has the administration made it harder, Mark, to deport illegal immigrants?
First of all, Janet, if I can, you just summarized the Texas border bill perfectly. This is about detention and removing individuals that came here illegally. Once you do that, you're going to see this crisis dramatically start to reduce. But how this is happening? Because they're releasing them. It's that fact. Look, we just talked about this ruthless killer. The amount of resources, time, and effort that it took to catch just one person is astronomical. A lot of people just don't understand that. But this government right now, this administration's own life cycle report says that once they're released, less than 10% of them are ever removed. And everybody knows this. This is happening every single day. That's why we say detention. It's not only the law, but that's going to reduce criminals like this individual from being released into our cities. And it's also going to ensure once their claims are denied that they're going to be able to remove. But this administration obliterated that ability and that deterrence once they turned on catch and release.
Mark, Haiti right now in a state of chaos. As we know, the prime minister stepped down. Gang members in Haiti have claimed control of 80% of the capital there. How could this situation in Haiti impact mass migration here in the U.S. and how prepared or unprepared is the administration to handle that?
Well, Jen, first, a lot of people might not understand. You've probably forgotten more about Haiti than I'll ever know. Through your award-winning reporting there, you've received a Murrow Award and an Emmy back in 2010. So first of all, thank you for everything you've done back then. But we're already seeing that, Jan. We're already seeing some boats come. They're fleeing Haiti and coming right to Florida. Florida encountered just, I think a few days ago, a boat filled with illegal Haitians. They had drugs and weapons. And so this is why it's so important that this administration utilize the Coast Guard to interdict these boats that are oftentimes, they're unsafe, they're overcrowded, and return those that are trying to flee immediately. It's going to actually save Haitian lives, but it's also going to prevent us and our system from already being overwhelmed and broken that it is right now. And think about it, it goes back to the same issue, Jan, the vetting. We're not going to have the ability to vet those that are coming, whether they're good or bad. That's the reality. What we should be doing is helping the Dominican Republic beef up their resources, just like we did with respect to Poland for Ukrainians fleeing the war that Russia has imposed on them. We should be doing the same thing in the Dominican Republic. But right now, they're building a wall and they're refusing to take Haitians for the very same reason that we shouldn't.
Thank you so much, Mark, for always giving us your expertise on this and for mentioning Haiti. Yes, I did spend a whole week there back in 2010, right after the earthquake there. It was chaotic back then, just like it is now. Mark Morgan, great to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks.
Right now, women in the workplace are feeling frustrated as they're stuck with fewer raises and promotions. The National Desk, Janae Bowens, has a look at the issues and how to possibly fix the problem.
This Women's History Month comes with some not so great news of setbacks in the workplace.
They have aspirations to lead, and sometimes they do get overlooked.
Elle Michelle Smith helps women get C-suite roles, but she's not surprised by a new poll from CNBC and SurveyMonkey. It shows just 39% of women say their salary is higher now than it was a year ago, and only 20% say their career has advanced.
Very digitally motivated, and it's fast-paced, it's competitive.
Smith says women must advocate for themselves, be assertive, and go above and beyond their job descriptions.
Solving a problem for the organization that will impact the bottom line and their ROI is so important.
HR professional Julie Balke says you must also gather information before making your case.
Any conversation that you have about this should be from a business perspective. Here's my performance. Here's the feedback I've gotten. Here is how I compare to my peers based on my knowledge.
And both agree relationships play a factor too.
And you know, those sponsors are the ones that beat their fist on the table for you and put their skin in the game to make things happen for you.
Performance is about the results you deliver, but also not just the results, but how you get it done. What are the relationships you cultivate?
Despite these setbacks, there's some improvement too. 45% of working women say they rarely or never feel burnt out at work. This is up 4 points from a year ago. In Washington, I'm Janae Bowens for the National Desk.
Up next on the National Desk, America's News Now, solving the teacher shortage, the unique program incentivizing students to become educators. Plus, taking things into their own hands, the pair of fast friends combating food insecurity within their community. The National Desk team of reporters is bringing you the headlines from coast to coast. We're taking the pulse of America, and we start in Cincinnati with a unique program aiming to combat a shortage of teachers.
We value what we do.
Prince Edward Johnson II teaches at Aiken twice a week, but he isn't a high school teacher. He's a college professor from Miami University.
Coming from poor Black working class communities, you just don't get that kind of message, so it feels very fulfilling.
He's part of a program called Teach Cincinnati. It started back in 2018. It works by recruiting high school students who want to be teachers. Those students take college classes for credit, then get admission into Miami University's education program with financial support. Once they graduate, they get preferred hiring status back at CPS.
It is hard to actually build a pipeline for a teacher shortage when you have a teacher shortage.
Good morning, ma'am. What would you like?
What looks like an outdoor grocery store along Route 1 in Alexandria is actually a remarkable story of friendship and empathy spanning 4 years, involving Ed Moore and Deacon James Meyer.
In the last 4 years, I think we fed over 50,000 people.
Now, donations pour in from grocery stores, churches, and nonprofits like United Community to provide nutrient-dense fare for a community still very much in need.
When I say fresh, look at it. Zoom in and take a look at it.
On Fridays, fresh produce rolls in, which means hundreds line up around the church.
People are hurting, plain and simple. They're hurting.
In Oregon, 2 hikers were rescued after becoming stranded on a cliff overnight at the Columbia River Gorge. As the weather gets warmer, authorities are warning tourists that the temperatures in the mountains are colder than it may seem.
I think a lot of times the people that we see get into trouble are the people that are just driving through. They see how beautiful it is, and they just decide to pull over and go on a hike. Not prepared with the proper footwear, the proper clothing.
Rescue crews located the stranded hikers using drones. They were able to hike out to safety. Still ahead, a popular budget airline cutting flights to several U.S. destinations. How the changes could impact your summer travel plans. Developing now, JetBlue Airways is making major changes to its flight schedule this year. Starting in June, the company is cutting a number of unprofitable routes to several destinations in the U.S. and abroad. The changes will also help the airline allow for more inspections. The removal of certain stops come as the company has reportedly lost more than $2 billion since 2019. Taking a look at the top trending stories on our website right now. In California, a pastor has been charged for allegedly commissioning a murder-for-hire plot. The victim of the crime, who was linked romantically to the pastor's daughter, is expected to be okay. A police department in California is taking a creative approach to censoring social media content under a new state law. The unit has gotten away with posting arrest photos of non-violent criminals by covering their faces with Lego heads. In Oklahoma, a traffic stop that led to the recovery of a stolen vehicle also uncovered something more sentimental. The car contained old stamps and handwritten postcards from a soldier dating back to the 1950s. Those stories and much more available right now at thenationaldesk.com. Ahead in our next half hour, the mysterious brain injury impacting U.S. diplomats. New details on Havana syndrome from the National Institutes of Health. Plus, learning from mistakes. An expert explains what the U.S. could have done to prevent learning loss during the pandemic. You're watching the National Desk, America's News Now. You can catch us live weekdays from 6 a.m. to 11 a.m. and 10 p.m. to midnight Eastern Time, and anytime online at thenationaldesk.com. We'll be right back.
The National Desk, America's News Now.
Components in their weapons and their surveillance systems.
The race to outcompete China. New fears. American technology is falling behind. Plus,
chances are there's already a cyber criminal out there with your social security numbers.
Tax season scams. How to protect your data if you haven't filed yet. And later, banning toxic chemicals. The state's outlining certain food additives and the potential health impacts. From the nation's capital, this is the National Desk, America's News Now. I'm Dee Dee Gatton, and the future of TikTok in the United States is still very much up in the air, as Senate leadership hasn't decided how or whether to move forward with a bipartisan bill that would force TikTok to be sold by its Chinese parent company or be banned in the U.S. Senators recently received a classified briefing on the issue. The National Desk, Atra El-Nashar, reports on how this fits into broader concerns about national security.
Washington's in a race to outcompete China, and some lawmakers say they are long past a wake-up call. Fears are setting in that the U.S. is falling behind, especially when it comes to technology, putting national security in peril.
Where our adversaries use American components in their weapons and their surveillance systems.
Like that infamous Chinese spy balloon last year, which U.S. officials say relied on American technology.
Our current export control system is deeply flawed.
Concerns not unrelated to American semiconductors turning up in Russian weapon systems for its invasion of Ukraine. Partisan disagreements over how to target and implement export controls getting in the way of Congress's ability to close gaps that allow U.S. tech to get into the wrong hands. Meanwhile, an effort to protect Americans' user data from the Chinese Communist Party may be losing momentum. Last week, the House overwhelmingly passed a bill that would force TikTok to be sold from its Chinese parent company ByteDance or be banned in the U.S. Senate leadership appears much more hesitant.
I'm confident of nothing when it comes to the Senate, but I guess I should say I'm cautiously optimistic given the statements of support that many senators, particularly Senators Warner and Rubio, have made.
I absolutely would like to see it expedited. Nobody's talking about a ban. We're talking about transferring the ownership and the algorithm to some other control that's not Chinese.
Warner and other backers of the bill are careful to phrase it that way because they know just how unpopular a TikTok ban would be among young voters in this election year, regardless of how much of a national security threat it may pose. On Capitol Hill, I'm Atrel Najar for the National Desk, America's News Now.
Right now, Russian President Vladimir Putin is tightening his grip on power with a manufactured electoral win. He won more than 87% of the vote on a record turnout. That means Putin, who's led Russia for the better part of 20 years, will continue on as president until at least 2030. European Union diplomats are condemning the managed election.
This has not been free and fair elections. No OSCE observation. Highly restricted environment, which is diplomatically what I can say, but more than that, this election has been based on repression and intimidation.
The Kremlin carefully curated Putin's opponents. His closest rival was Nikolai Kharitonov of the Communist Party, who pulled out slightly more than 4% of the vote. This after Alexei Navalny, Putin's most formidable opponent, died. A government investigation found brain scans of patients with Havana syndrome showed no evidence of injury or abnormalities. The mysterious brain injuries were first reported among U.S. Embassy personnel in Cuba in 2016. Symptoms could include dizziness, head pressure, and headaches. Researchers with the National Institutes of Health conducted 2 studies comparing patients who reported the ailment with a healthy control group. New information in the cyber attack against healthcare provider United Health. The company says it's testing software for submitting medical claims for its subsidiary Change Healthcare and adds other major systems have been largely restored. Change Healthcare was the target of a ransomware attack last month. A Russian-based ransomware group claimed responsibility. President Biden announced one of the biggest federal investments in U.S. chip manufacturing yet. He was in Chandler, Arizona this week at an Intel chip plant, touting an agreement with the company to provide up to $8.5 billion in direct funding and $11 billion in loans for Intel plants in Arizona, Ohio, Oregon, and New Mexico. The administration says this investment means the U.S. will produce 20% of the world's most advanced chips by 2030.
We will enable advanced semiconductor manufacturing to make a comeback here in America after 40 years.
The U.S. designs advanced chips but hasn't been able to manufacture them here in the U.S., which poses a national security and economic risk. It's part of Biden's pitch to voters that his policies have brought manufacturing back to U.S. soil. He says Intel funding will lead to a combined 30,000 new construction and manufacturing jobs. According to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, government employees make 40% more than workers in the private sector. Joining Jan Jeffco to discuss is former White House economic advisor Steve Moore.
So why such a huge disparity here, and what does this tell us about really the state of our growing government?
Well, good question. And by the way, you called this inflated wages. I wish it were inflated wages for all American workers, but it really is this what we call the protected class of government workers. And it just isn't fair that, let's say a private sector worker with equal kind of job and equal skills than a government worker, that government worker is getting, as you just said, a much bigger salary, paid for, by the way, by taxpayers, and also substantially higher benefits. And so that is something that we can't afford as a country right now, Jan. How many times have we been talking in the last number of months about the massive debt that we're running at the federal level? We can't continue to pay these workers a huge premium. And don't forget, by the way, government workers have basically lifetime tenure. It's almost impossible to fire a federal worker as well. So what we need to have is parity between what the private sector workers are making and what the government workers are making.
Yeah, and it's been 4 years since COVID, as we know. Even during the shutdowns, a lot of these government workers were paid. A lot of private sector employees were not. And now we're learning many of the government interventions were incredibly costly with little health benefit, as we're learning those non-lockdown states had similar death rates but quicker recoveries. Now, your organization, the Committee to Unleash Prosperity, did a report on this. And what did you find in that report?
Well, the big headline on this is that almost every intervention that the government made in 2020 was a mistake, and in some cases catastrophic mistakes. First of all, remember that it was exactly 4 years ago we had, what was it going to be, 14 days to stop the spread. Well, it didn't. It turned into more like 14 months, and in some states even almost 2 years of lockdowns, school closures, stay-at-home orders. And the evidence is crystal clear on this, Jan, that number one, lockdowns really did not work to save lives. We estimate about 10,000 lives were saved by lockdowns, but multiple times more lives were ruined or lost because of lockdowns. I mean, you just had that presentation on what's happening with drug addiction in America. Right. When did that big spike up happen? If you look at that picture that you had on the screen, it was right when we had the lockdowns, when people were locked in their homes. You had a lot of what we call excess deaths from the lockdowns, whether it was depression, whether it was suicide, whether it was drug abuse, alcohol abuse. People couldn't go to the hospitals. And then, of course, the most tragic decision that we made that we can never do again was we shut down our schools, in some cases for a year to 2 years. And that meant, and we know that the distance learning did not work for kids. And that is going to cost our kids trillions of dollars of lost wages in the decades to come when they turn into adults. So we wrote this report because we want to make sure we don't make these mistakes again. Lockdowns were a failure. We should never have shut down our schools because, by the way, Jan, children were never really vulnerable to begin with COVID. It was older people.
Yeah, and a lot of educators have said we just lost an entire generation of students, of kids as a result of that. And that's the future of our country.
And by the way, can I just add something to that? You're right. But the kids that were hurt the most were the lowest income kids and minority kids who didn't have alternatives. You know, wealthy parents could send their kids to have tutors and things like that. So we're not pointing fingers and saying this person got it wrong or that person is saying, let's learn from what happened and let's not make these mistakes again.
And you can view the full interview plus more top stories online all the time at thenationaldesk.com. New details on how to keep your money safe during tax season. If you haven't filed yet, experts say to watch out for scammers trying to file for you. They might submit a fake W-2 in order to get a refund, which could, of course, create big problems when you go to file for yourself. Another popular tax season scam is calls or texts offering tax credits in exchange for personal information.
We should protect information like our driver's license, our social security number, all that personally identifying information. We should absolutely do our best to protect that. Chances are there's already a cyber criminal out there with your social security numbers.
The top 3 things you can do to protect yourself from tax scams are using different passwords across accounts, utilizing 2-factor authentication, and filing your taxes early before scammers have a chance to. A California bill would ban public schools from serving food products that contain certain artificial dyes and chemicals. I'm back with Courtney from the Fact Check team. Are there any other states considering similar bills?
Yeah, Dee Dee, in Illinois, there's a bill that would ban products that contain chemicals like Red-3 and potassium bromate. There's also a similar pair of bills in New York, and I want to note that the EU banned several of these chemicals like titanium dioxide, and same with countries like Australia, New Zealand, China, and India.
And why are these chemicals getting banned?
So according to the FDA, studies have found some of these chemicals can cause major health problems, including cancer, nervous system damage, hyperactivity, and other behavioral issues, even reproductive health issues. And several of these additives haven't been reviewed by the FDA in decades. For example, a study from NIH found that potassium bromate, which is used in baked goods like breads and pastries, is a possible carcinogen, which means it can cause cancer. Another NIH study found that all 9 U.S. approved food dyes raise health concerns like Red 3, Red 40, Yellow 5, and Yellow 6, causing cancer in animals.
And we're looking into a range of products that a lot of people enjoy.
Right.
Courtney, thank you. For more on this Fact Check Team topic, including links to their sources, scan the QR code on your screen or visit thenationaldesk.com. If you suffer from seasonal allergies during the club, you probably think your town is the worst in America. Well, that's not true unless you live in Wichita, Kansas. Rounding out the top 5 are Virginia Beach, Greenville, South Carolina, Dallas, Texas, and Oklahoma City. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, more than 50 million Americans suffer from allergies. Still to come, our team of correspondents breaks down this week in Washington, from possible new restrictions on gas vehicles to new challenges in the border crisis.
Welcome back. Our Washington Bureau covers the nation's capital every day, reporting on the important issues facing the country and how they impact you. Our team of correspondents is here to share their insights and the stories they've been covering. The migrant crisis taking a toll in areas that previously promised to protect illegal immigrants. National correspondent Christine Frizzell, what are the financial and political challenges these areas are facing?
Yeah, this is happening, Steve, for largely 2 reasons. One, we are hearing story after story about crimes being committed by migrants. So just this past week, we saw a Haitian migrant in Massachusetts staying at a hotel for migrants there get charged with raping a 15-year-old girl, also staying in that same hotel with disabilities. We have this happening. We have people being robbed on their, walking down the street in New York. People are scared, but I would say more than crime. We are seeing a change of heart by residents because of a lack of resources. For example, in Denver, the mayor there had to cut the budget to be able to pay for the influx of migrants coming to his city. In New York, we've seen so many things happen. And so what you're hearing is, for example, Mayor Eric Adams in New York saying, we don't want to have to abide by sanctuary policies because it's costing our residents, it's costing certainly our budget. Even in non-big cities, even in central Pennsylvania, we saw the county leaders there overturn a sanctuary law, calling themselves an unsanctuary county in Lancaster County. There are people who have stepped forward and say, reminding these officials, America was built on the backs of migrants. We have always been a welcoming place, but we've also had a lot of people previously, with open arms say, you know what, enough is enough. When we can't take care of our own people, we have to at some point say, we are not going to be able to take care of all the migrants coming from all around the world.
Right, and the immigration issue, a top one in this election year, complicating matters for a lot of Democrats especially, and we'll see how this all plays out moving forward. Meanwhile, the Biden administration moving to impose the strongest gas vehicle emission standards ever. National correspondent Kayla Gaskins, what will this mean for the average American?
Right, Steve. So this means that your cars are going to look a lot different in a couple years. We've been waiting for these regulations to come down, and finally the EPA this week gave us a look at what the new regulations are going to be. And Steve, they are the toughest on gas vehicles that we've ever seen in this country. Now, it's important to note these emissions, though, won't go into effect until 2027. They target cars and they target trucks, and this is part of the Biden administration's push to get Americans to buy electric vehicles, to make electric vehicles, the vehicle when you head to the car lot that you want to buy, that is cheaper, that is more in line with the standards, and make the gas cars a little bit more difficult to come by. It's important to know that even though these are the toughest regulations that the EPA has ever imposed on emissions, they are a bit of a rollback from what we saw previewed last year. And I think that's a response to where the country is right now. You see EV sales really plateauing. Ford and General Motors have already cut back on their production of electric vehicles. Tesla has slashed prices. The rental car company Hertz has unloaded about 20,000 of their electric vehicles from their fleet because people just weren't renting them. And the CEO that was actually making that push for Hertz to go towards electric cars ended up stepping down this week because that move cost the company so much money. But the next few years, I think buying a car here in America will look a lot different, Steve, than it does right now.
And it's going to be interesting to watch to see if the government can help engineer this transition to EVs, or the consumers are going to drive the market in the coming years. Something to watch. And there are continued concerns about China and technology, especially TikTok. National correspondent Audra Elnashar, what is Congress doing about all that?
Well, it totally depends what Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer does next with that House-approved bill that we saw pass last week with overwhelming bipartisan support. And what that bill would do would force a sale of TikTok from its China-based parent company ByteDance. They would get about 6 months to do that once the bill, should it become law. And if it's not sold, banned in the United States. 170 million U.S. users no longer able to access TikTok. It's a politically volatile bill, to be sure, but enough lawmakers think the national security stakes are so high they are getting behind it. Now, in the Senate, on one hand, it does feel like momentum is fizzling out. But on the other hand, you have to remember, it moved extremely quickly in the House. It was introduced, and a week later, it passed the House. In this House, where there's very little agreement on anything. So there is a lot of other stuff going on in the Senate, like the budget process. It's also an election year, notorious for things not getting done. So if it goes for a vote right away, there's a good chance it'll pass. But right now, it looks like Schumer is leaning toward sending it to committee, which would really draw out the process.
Audra, Kayla, Christine, as always, excellent reporting, and thank you all for your hard work. Back to you.
Up next, the dangerous item brought by a toddler to daycare, why his mother is now facing charges. Plus, community cleanup, neighbors coming together in tornado-torn Ohio as the long road to recovery continues. This is the National Desk, America's News Now. We have reporters all across the country in your neighborhoods covering issues that matter to you. From Ohio neighbors lending a helping hand to tornado victims to Kentucky pushing to keep construction workers safe, we're taking the pulse of America. But we begin with a mom in Florida facing charges for an item discovered inside her toddler's lunchbox at his daycare.
According to a Riviera Beach police report, a teacher at Jackson's daycare was opening up a kid's lunchbox when they saw a gun inside. She then screamed, "Gun!" and another teacher came to help and see if it was real. And it was. That's when they called police. And when officers arrived, they found a 9mm Glock 43 handgun. The boy's mom, 39-year-old Shanae Davis, told police that she normally keeps the gun in her glove box. But lately, her apartment complex has seen several break-ins, so she's been taking the gun inside. On Thursday, she placed the gun inside her son's lunchbox because she doesn't carry a purse, but she forgot to take it out. Parents say while having a gun is a safety precaution, incidents like this are a reminder of how important it is to keep these weapons away from children.
Reality setting in for some in Russell's Point.
I've lived in this county my whole life. Never seen nothing like this. Been a couple little ones, but nothing like this one. This was bad.
We met Doug and Phil last week, just hours after tragedy hit.
I felt amazed that you came found us again. I couldn't believe it.
The pair, close neighbors, saying their homes suffered minor damage, but they know that many lost everything and some didn't make it out alive. Doug says watching community come to life has been overwhelming.
I have no other word for it. Just simply amazing. Well, they just come and help. They don't ask. They don't require payment. They don't ask for anything. They just do it. They're there for you.
There is more work going on our roads.
According to the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet, in the last 5 years, there were 49 fatalities in work zones in the state. 7 of these were construction workers.
A camera would then take a photograph of the rear of your vehicle.
Representative John Blanton is the sponsor of House Bill 192 that would install cameras in work zones, along with signs indicating the cameras are in place. Citations would be issued to those caught speeding. The purpose is to make work zones safer by slowing drivers down. The first violation would be a $75 fine. Additional violations in a 3-year period would be $125.
You know, I don't think it's too big of an issue to keep everybody safe. I work in construction, so, you know, the guys out there working and stuff, it can get dangerous if people are speeding.
Still ahead here, the stories making headlines next week, from a delay in one of Trump's legal trials to a full autopsy report set to be released. Looking ahead to stories making headlines this week, the judge in former President Donald Trump's hush money case is holding a hearing Monday to set a date for the trial. He's facing 34 counts of falsifying business records. On Wednesday, authorities are expected to release the full autopsy report in the death of a non-binary high school student in Oklahoma. The state medical examiner's office already revealing that 16-year-old Nex Benedict's death was a suicide. Also happening Wednesday, the 3 men convicted of chasing and killing Ahmaud Arbery are back in court. Their lawyers are asking a judge to throw out hate crime convictions. New information now. This year's World Happiness Report is out, and the U.S. came in at number 23 and dropped due to a rise in happiness among other countries. In the U.S., happiness scores from people under 30 years old were dramatically lower than people 60 and older. It's also the first time the U.S. has dropped out of the top 20 since the report was first published in 2012. At number 1, Finland was once again named the world's happiest country for the 7th straight year. Denmark took 2nd place. And for the 2nd year in a row, French Bulldogs topped the list of most popular dog breeds in the U.S. Something to make you smile here. The American Kennel Club uses its registration statistics to create the rankings of purebred dogs. The Labrador Retriever had claimed the top spot for 31 years before being toppled by the French Bulldog in 2022. Labs are now number 2 on the list, followed by Golden Retrievers, German Shepherds, and Poodles. And I love all of them. That'll be all for us on the weekend edition of the National Desk, America's News Now. Don't forget, you can catch us live from 6 a.m. to 11 a.m. and 10 p.m. to midnight Eastern Time. Check your local listings. You can also watch us online and catch up with the latest headlines on thenationaldesk.com. Thanks for watching the weekend edition of the National Desk. I'm Dee Dee Gatton, and from all of us here, have a great week.